reading towards his PhD rather. Now, Dr. Roger Scoon is a researcher, author, and internationally recognized authority on the Bushveld complex in South Africa. And of course, later on, we're going to have Dr. Andrew Mitchell read the citation, telling us a bit more about why exactly is Dr. Roger Scoon like the alumni, the distinguished alumni for 2021. The conversation will be led by Rhodes University, Dr. Steve Prevec, who's an associate professor in the Department of Geology and a member of the department since 2004. He's also previously served as the geology head of the department for 8 years now. So best believe when it comes to the topic of geology of South Africa and the national parks in East Africa, the impact of tourism, the two men that we have here today are specifically the one to tackle this specific issue. So remember, if you have any questions of your own, you can simply jot them down on the line in the comments and we'll get to read them through. We get to ululate, we get to celebrate and literally be all about Roger and get to tap into his world, be a fly on the wall in his world and find out more about his commitment to his society, to his field, as well as his life itself. For those of you who are new to our Distinguished Alumni Awards, if you're wondering what they're all about, basically every single year in around about May, Rhodes University simply nominates an alumni who is deserving of the honor, someone who embodies the motto that says, where leaders learn. And Roger this evening is specifically that, and of course the three other distinguished alumni that we've had in the year. Now, we recognize old Rhodans who have made a contribution in society, into the university, as well as various professional fields that they belong into. So if you have someone that fits this criteria, be sure to have a look at www.ru.ac.za and inquire about how some of your favorites can be part of maybe the 2022 cohort of the distinguished alumni. So definitely have a look out for that. If you're wondering who have been part of this cohort for 2021, it's obviously today we've got Roger, and then we had Mr. Unathi Nkamlana, we had Heloise Henning, and of course Bernard Agalas also being part of this conversation, all having done amazing, amazing things. It's about 2 minutes past 6 o'clock. We're about to start and kick off our conversation. I hope everyone's comfortable. I hope everyone's ready. I can see Clyde already commenting through. I can see Linda also coming through saying, congratulations, Roger, congratulations. So if you've got similar congratulatory messages, please definitely write them down there on the side. And if you have any questions today to put through to any of our guests, please be sure to write them down as well, and we'll be sure to come through them. So as we officially start, good evening and welcome to everyone in all the different pockets of the world. Thank you so much for coming to our fourth and final installment of the conversation. My name is Unondobeko Wagasbisi Kumalo. I am a broadcaster, storyteller, and a founder of OK Show Media. I love conversations and I love moments like today. We're going to be being part of these conversations that have seen us literally thread a purple string into amazing alumni. Like I said earlier, we had the blessing of having the opportunity to speak to Miss Heloise Henning Emdem, who is currently the manager of internationally sponsored research at Charlottetown University in Canada. So yes, our network does extend quite wide. We had Mr. Bernard Agalas, who has been the auditor regulator at the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors for 11 years and in the auditing profession for 30 years. The topic there was the future of audit. And then we kicked off our 2021 session with a bang. We kicked it off with the topic called Excellence and Diligence in the Public Service with Unathi Nkamlana, who is the newly appointed Financial Sector Conduct Authority Commissioner. So you can understand how crucial and how important these conversations have been and how empowering they've been in the process, creating quite a lot of agency. If you missed any of those conversations, you can go to our YouTube page at Rhodes University YouTube page and simply catch on and get ready for the bit that's coming through today. Now, today's conversation, as we tackle geology of South Africa and the national parks in East Africa, the conversation will look at three particular topics that we will expand on a bit later in the conversation. But I do want to acknowledge a couple of guests that are coming through that are parts of our session before we jump straight into things. With us today, with special acknowledgements, I'd like to acknowledge the Rhodes University Chancellor, members of the University Council, members of the Board of Governors, and and the executive management of the university. On behalf of Dr. Roger Scoon, we'd like to pay special acknowledgements to Professor Hugh Eales, who was his supervisor for his PhD while he was at Rhodes University. Also like to acknowledge Professor Maurice Viljoen from WITS, who was supervisor of his PhD fieldwork and spent many years in collaborations with him in the Bushveld and the GeoHeritage project space. Of course, Dr. Andrew Mitchell as well is also amongst our acknowledgements, as you get to speak or see Andrew rather a bit later on as he passes through the citations. Andrew was in collaboration with Roger over many years and still ongoing around Bushveld projects. And of course, Roger would also like to give a special acknowledgement to his wife for accompanying him on the Geotraveller excursions and the encouragement and support in writing the many, many books and articles that he's put together over the years. So thank you, everyone. And on that note, welcome and thank you, everyone. Just to recap for everyone in terms of the order of proceedings for today, we're going to have the reading of citation by Dr. Andrew Mitchell, and then we're going to have congratulatory sentiment from our Chancellor, Dr. Sizwe Mabizela, and of course, an introduction of today's topic from Professor Steve Prevec, who's going to be tackling the conversation today. So without any further ado, I'd like to call on Dr. Andrew Mitchell, who is responsible for nominating Dr. Scoon today, to tell us a bit more about what is it about our distinguished guest that makes him so formidable and so profound in society, but also in his field as well. Andrew, are you here with us and can you join us and share a bit of this?
Yes.
Please definitely join us. Let's find out more about why exactly did you nominate Andrew, but more importantly, share a bit of some of his work that he's done within the field of geology.
Okay. Yes, good evening, everyone, and thanks, Montebeko. You've covered a great deal of what I'm to be saying in this citation. But anyway, I'll carry on. I've been closely associated with Roger Scoon's professional life in academia and industry since we started our PhDs together at Rhodes University in 1981. And remarkably, that's a little more than 40 years ago now. It's therefore been a privilege for me to nominate Roger for one of the 2021 Rhodes University Distinguished Alumni Awards, and consequently to be reading this citation to you. Roger was born in Bristol in England and grew up in a rural village in the northern part of the county of Somerset in England's West Country. He obtained his BSc Honours degree in 1976 and his Master's degree in 1978, both from the Department of Mineral Exploration at University College in Cardiff, Wales. After working for 3 years as a mine geologist on the Zambian copper belt, Roger registered for a PhD in geology at Rhodes University in 1981, under the joint supervision of the late Professor Hugh Eales at Rhodes and the late Professor Maurice Viljoen at the University of the Witwatersrand. He graduated in 1985. Roger's PhD research ignited a passion for the geology of the Bushveld complex that's continued throughout his subsequent working life. Between 1986 and 2000, he initiated and managed several exploration projects in the Bushveld complex. One of his most successful exploration projects resulted in the establishment of Impala Platinum's Marula mine on the Farm Winners Hoek in the Eastern Bushveld complex. He continues to undertake his own geological research on a range of projects, partly funded by Rhodes University, as well as providing drill core samples from some of his exploration projects to staff and students at the university for research purposes. Roger's also served in the past for several years as an external examiner on Rhodes University's Exploration Geology MSc program. He's published in excess of 40 articles in peer-reviewed scientific journals and books, and is an internationally recognized authority on the Bushveld complex of South Africa and its contained ore deposits of the platinum group metals, chromium, and vanadium. He's a fellow of the Geological Society of South Africa, the Geological Society of London, and the Society of Economic Geologists. Roger's interest in the Bushveld complex extends beyond his written research and publications on the topic, and in 2007 and 2010, he initiated and presented workshops with me on the Bushveld complex under the auspices of the Geological Society of South Africa. These workshops were attended by more than 160 delegates from both industry and academia and included well-planned and informative field trips. Rogers also led several groups of international delegates on excursions to the Bushveld complex, particularly including a trip linked to the 15th International Geo Congress in Cape Town in 2015. Since 2010, Rogers branched out from his interest in the Bushveld complex and has developed an interest in geoheritage and geotravel. He initiated and continues to produce a series of short but informative articles on areas of both geological and historical interest from his travels around the world, illustrated copiously with his own high-quality photography. These are published in Geo Bulletin, which is the Geological Society of South Africa's quarterly news bulletin, under Roger's own title, The Geotraveller. The series has so far achieved an unbroken run of 46 contributions. Roger published a selection of updated articles from these Geotraveller series in a book, which has been published by the scientific publishing house Springer this year. This was Roger's second book, and it followed the geology of the national parks of central and southern Kenya and northern Tanzania, which was published in 2018. Roger is currently finalizing a third book with local publishers, which will serve as a popular guide to the national parks of East Africa, including Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and the Virunga Mountains. He also established a non-profit organization directed at promoting geotourism in East Africa, including training workshops to assist professional guides and game rangers. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that. Really, really beautiful to find out more about what some of the work that Roger has been up to. And one of my favorite things that in your motivation, you're like, if there was still a DSc degree, you would definitely submit a very strong motivation for him. And I definitely understand why, over and above being a distinguished alumni. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your time. I'm going to pass on now to a congratulatory message by Dr. Sizwe Mabizela, who is always here, ready to sprinkle some cheer on our distinguished alumni. Dr. Mabizela, good to see you today. What congratulatory message do you have for Roger?
Thank you very much, Nontobeko. Family, friends, and colleagues of Dr. Roger Scoon, Rhodes University alumni who are joining us virtually from all corners of the globe, fellow South Africans, Rhodes University leadership team, staff, students, and of course, our distinguished alumnus, Dr. Roger Scoon. Rhodes University honors and celebrates its alumni who have achieved distinction in their chosen field and have demonstrated exceptional leadership and dedicated service to their profession and humankind through the award of the Rhodes University Distinguished Alumni Award. The award recognizes the recipient as an outstanding role model for current and future generations of Rhodes University students. The recipients of this award should embody our slogan, where leaders learn, and our motto, vis virtus veritas. They should exemplify the attributes and values of social justice, empathy, kindness, decency, integrity, honesty, compassion, civility, and human solidarity. These are the attributes and values that Rhodes University seeks to inculcate in its graduates. This evening, we are singularly honored to recognize and celebrate one of our own, Dr. Roger Scoon, as a worthy recipient of the Rhodes University Distinguished Alumni Award. Roger, through your outstanding research in geology, you have distinguished yourself as a world authority on the Bushveld complex of South Africa. Your two books, the Geotraveller, Geology of Famous Geosites and Areas of Historical Interest, and Geology of National Parks of Central, Southern Kenya and Northern Tanzania, Geotourism of the Gregory Rift Valley, Active Volcanism and Regional Plateaus, feature on the good read list. Very important acknowledgement of the value of these books. On behalf of our council, our chancellor, and the entire Rhodes University community, I extend our heartfelt congratulations to you, Roger, on your well-deserved recognition by your alma mater with the Rhodes University Distinguished Alumni Award. Roger, we would like you, your family, your colleagues, and the whole world to know just how immensely proud we are of you and how deeply honored we are to count you as one of the most distinguished alumni of our university. As your alma mater, we salute you, we honor you, and we celebrate you for all that you are, for your personal and professional achievements, and for your exceptional contribution to our nation and humankind. And above all, thank you for flying our purple flag with great honor and with great distinction. Once more, hearty congratulations, Roger. I thank you.
You're on mute, Roger. You're on mute already. Come on. Halala, halala.
I was just saying thank you very much. It was very kind words. I wasn't sure you were talking about me, but maybe you were. Thank you.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Babizela, for that one. We're now going to hand over to Dr. Steve Prevec, who's going to be facilitating and navigating the conversation today with Roger. And Steve is an associate professor in the Department of Geology and is the member of the department since 2004 at Rhodes University. So without any further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Steve as they tackle the first topic, which talks about geoheritage of the eastern limb of the Bushveld complex. Steve, are you with us? And hello and welcome. And I hope you're excited as much as I am.
I don't know if I'm as excited as you are based on your body language, but I will give it my best shot.
Take it away.
So I've been asked to start with a little introduction. So thanks, Ntobeko. So it's my privilege to be able to participate here in honoring my colleague, Dr. Roger Scoon, as a recipient of the Rhodes Distinguished Alumnus Award this year. And I'd like to provide a little introduction into the concept of geological heritage to provide context for Roger's contributions to it. So geology is most widely thought of as a field of study mainly relating to mining and mineral exploitation. However, this actually makes up a fairly small proportion of how geology is actually taught as a subject, and only quite a small proportion of geological research. Geology is fundamentally the study of how the earth works, based on the evidence preserved in rocks. And most of the rocks we study are the ones exposed at the surface that we can see. And by observation and analysis of what we can see, we can extrapolate an enormous amount about what we can't see about how those rocks formed. That is, where they came from, how they got there, when did it happen, and how did this influence other aspects of the Earth's surface, such as influences on climate and many other factors, including how humans, people, interact with our planet and vice versa. So geoheritage has been on the map, so to speak, of the South African geological community for a long time. Domestic publications such as the GeoBulletin that Andrew mentioned earlier, and international publications such as Springer's quarterly journal GeoHeritage, which began in 2009, provide forums for the sharing and promotion of geological heritage. And this brings us to perhaps the most critical element, which is the recognition that it's the passion and dedication of individuals who both recognize the importance of and also are willing to commit themselves to these causes, which is essential to the development of geoheritage projects. No geoheritage programs would have succeeded without the initiative and persistence of dedicated individuals driving them. The Bushveld complex, which straddles numerous provinces in northeastern South Africa, and which has long been venerated by geologists who study igneous rocks, as well as those who study ore deposits, has been a subject of particular interest to Dr. Scoon for years. I would like to now personally congratulate Roger on his award and to invite him to share his thoughts on his history with the geology of Africa, beginning with the Bushveld complex. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you, Steve. Sorry, very kind words. And before we start talking about the Bushveld, I'd like to thank Rhodes University, of course, and the Vice Chancellor for his very kind words, and the board of his board, which have set up, these awards and made the presentation so professional, particularly Luanda, who I've been chatting to for the last few days. And I must say it's fantastic to see Rhodes doing so well, and all the new people there, and the whole change of scene from the days when I was there, when the university was still relatively small and obviously for a privileged few. And I think it's just an incredible success story, actually, the way I see it admittedly from a distance over here in Knysna. So, and I pop up every now and then, and I thoroughly enjoy my visits. And Rhodes has clearly played a huge part in my life, and I've been incredibly lucky to have Professor Hugh Eales, who was one of the legendary leaders of the geology department for many, many years, and internationally recognized scientist. And he essentially impressed on me the whole principles of geological research and, many of the things which I've carried forward in recent years, which I didn't really learn at Cardiff, my first university, I must say. I think Rhodes is a very, very special place. And I was also lucky to have my PhD supervised by Professor Maurice Villerne, and Maurice and Richard, the two twins, are world famous geologists. And I somehow managed to fall on my feet, being looked after by these two very respectable gentlemen, I would say, with great integrity. And I think I've been incredibly fortunate in my sort of 40 years that I've now lived in South Africa, which I've loved every minute of it, actually, to be honest. So I think we were going to start a few slides, Steve. Is that the order now?
I believe that is now happening.
Yeah, we just thought we'd introduce a few slides for the people to see, just a few pictures of why the Bushveld's so famous. It's the layering, and there's a satellite image there on the right just showing the rugged scenery, and it's really the rugged scenery of the eastern part of the old Transvaal, between the Highveld and the Kruger Park area, which makes these incredible outcrops. And you can see the famous ore bodies like the UG2 here on the left, and the layering of the UG1, the dark chromite layers in a white rock. It's a striped rock, and we just have no idea how a lot of this layering forms. The photograph on the left is in a chromite open pit where chromite's being mined, and the dark vertical aligned body is a discordant body, which I specialized in. On the right was an opening of the old Marinsky Reef. The cross section here is of the Onverwaard pipe, the world's oldest platinum mine. The red area in the middle with the glory hole, which is open to surface, is where it was mined. And just a few pictures of famous geologists on the right. And part of geoheritage, of course, is recognizing the contributions of the individuals. So, the people there was Arthur Hall, who actually mapped the complex over many, many years in the 1920s and 30s. Percy Wagner, who wrote about the deposits and died at a very young age in 1929 in his mid-40s, but was rated as South Africa's most famous geologist. And of course, Hans Marinsky, who is remembered for discovering the platinum deposits, and the Marinsky Reef is named after. So, you know, part of my research into the Bushveld has been directed at the discordant bodies, which I mentioned earlier. And I feel very privileged that together with Professor Maurice Viljoen, we named a new rock type, because most rock types, of course, were named many, many years ago. We came up with the name iron-rich ultramafic pegmatite. A little bit of a mouthful, but IRUP for short, to describe these very unusual rocks which cut across the layering. And it was very pleasing to see how the mine geologists over the years have taken this terminology on board, and now the rocks are internationally known by this name. We published a paper in 1985. It was my first paper, co-authored with Maurice Viljoen. I've also published articles on the origin of the platinum in the UG2 and the Marinsky Reef. But some of my most important contributions were with Hugh Eales and Bernd Teigler on the chromites. Hugh was or is, I would guess, a recognized expert on the Bushveld chromites, and we owe a huge amount of our thinking to the knowledge that he brought to the table. And but Hugh and I together invented a hypothesis called the lateral mixing hypothesis, which explains how magmas are intruded laterally into the Bushveld magma chamber, and they spread across the floor of the chamber, mix, and we believe this is how the platinum forms. This hypothesis is now widely recognized, but I have to say, unfortunately, our names have never come close to being recognized for this, for reasons which are very difficult to understand. I think somehow Rhodes gets left off the map a little bit, and you know, we tend to present our papers and then move on to the next one. We don't keep repeating and repeating, but that's slightly unfortunate, but we learn to deal with it. But in recent years, Andrew Mitchell's come up with a new idea, where we believe the reefs are related to the intrusion of sills into the complex. A completely new way of looking at it. And Andrew's done some brilliant research here, which we've published together, but he's been the main driver. And we've changed our hypothesis, which we now call lateral injection. So hopefully the rest of the community will catch up with this as well at some stage. And I'm very pleased with all of that, you know, high-powered, if you like, research which I've been involved with. But in recent years, together with Maurice Viljoen, Professor Maurice Viljoen, we started to get much more interested in the geoheritage. And we proposed that the eastern limb should be made into a geopark, which may be a new concept to some people and non-geologists in the audience. There's, I think, maybe as many as 40 or 50 geoparks in the world now. There's 2 in Africa. The first one's in Tanzania and Morocco. We're lagging behind, unfortunately. And I have to say that if the Eastern Bushveld was in Europe or North America or China, you know, there's no question it would be an incredibly famous tourist locality. And I think these things can generate a lot of tourism into the country. And hopefully the geological community can drive this, and we can get the various government departments on board to accept that, you know, the outcrops that we've got there is incredibly famous for geologists worldwide, but eventually will be known to non-specialists as well. And you know, it's amazing that every single person in the world just about has a lump of platinum from the Bushveld complex in the catalyst on their car. They have chromium, which is in stainless steel in their houses or in their artifacts in their houses, and so on and so on. The Bushveld is just the most remarkable geological phenomenon on Earth. And I felt very, very privileged to be allowed to work on it for so long. And as I said, the geoheritage idea is, I think it's growing in popularity now, and we maybe could start with doing what we call a platinum trail, where we recognize the history, the discoveries by Hans Marinsky. Many of the whole history of the discoveries I've written up in a number of articles, some with Maurice Viljoen, some on my own, or some with Andrew Mitchell. And there's many sites that we could go and visit in these areas and put up information boards. And of course, we have to get the local community on board, which is why that one slide with the three older geologists had pictures of the Jati Memorial Site, where the Battle of Sukukuni was fought between the Sukukuni warriors and the British Army back in the Victorian times. And you know, there's a fantastic history in that area where the local community are fully aware of the role of the platinum and chromite mines, and I think they will be very receptive to a geopark sort of concept. Steve?
You're making my job very easy so far.
Okay, good.
Based like a lot of the sort of classic exposures of the only one that I know is that's kind of been formally recognized for heritage value is the Dwars Rivier UG1 outcrop that you did show a photograph of there, or in Canadian Dwars River. Other than that, though, a lot of the classic exposures are kind of ones we know of through active mining. Is that a kind of obstacle, or is that helpful in terms of creating a sort of platinum trail in terms of access and things like that?
I think it's probably helpful for the uninitiated. The Dwars River site, that's the rock exposure of those black and white stripes, and it's one of the most, well, I guess the most famous example of igneous layering in the world. And you know, people might be interested to know that when the geologists first saw it, people thought it was sedimentary rocks, not igneous rocks. And we, as I said earlier, we still discuss hugely as to, oh, there we are, lovely picture. Thank you, Steve. Yeah. We still argue hugely about how an igneous, a body of magma can actually make these layers, where the, you know, the chromite and in that case, an amorphosite rock, a rock with feldspar is separated out, and you know, it's just a remarkable situation. But yeah, many of the famous sites are on the mining properties, but the mines, I mean, the whole attitude of the mining industry has changed hugely in recent years, which is fantastic. They're much more open to visits. We go all the time on visits. We get massive support from, you know, from the companies, particularly in my case, Impala, because of my connection with the Marula mine. And I think they're very supportive, and the fact that they're on mining sites, they can make them safe and establish access in that. And but even, say, for example, as you would know, the Mooihoek pipe, which was the discovery site, Onverwacht is the oldest mine, but the actual discovery was Mooihoek. It's in the middle of a small village, and you know, we visit the people all the time. And there's a lady called Miriam Mashaba, and her house is right next to the discovery. And we, you know, we make contacts, and she invites us in as a group of 30, 40 scruffy looking geologists with their hammers to wander through her house and go into her backyard to look at the exposures. So we're generally made very welcome. There's the odd situation where, you know, because there is quite a large rural community, but I think it's all possible. And I think, but we need the support of the mining community, the government, and the community, of course. You know, that's the most important.
But there's probably enough exposure, especially in the Eastern Bushveld, to like what is on mine property and what is not on mine property, that you could have a nice mix and the potential for little commercial development, things like that.
We could do, and I felt that at the Marula mine, that one picture of the very weathered brown-looking rock with the sort of entrance to the mine, that's at Vinarsuc, as you would know, and that's part of the mining infrastructure that Merensky put down in 1925. And it's very well preserved. It's hard rock. You feel safe. I took my international trip underground there on the IGC trip in 2015, and I must say that the people from all over the world, but you know, a good group from China and Japan and, you know, UK, Germany, America, etc., and they loved it. And I have this, to see these amazing rocks, but also to go down historical mine working. Somehow it fascinates people. I know there's loads and loads of historical mining sites in England where huge numbers of people visit, and you could create a platinum reef city equivalent to a gold reef city. It's not a shaft, you just walk underground, and the mining company could maybe establish some form of office and museum and employ some retired shift bosses who could take people down in groups, you know, all part of the local community. And I think, you know, tourism, you know, mining type tourism, geological tourism, however you address it, you know, because it's going to go on forever and ever, hopefully, you know, it's a long-term approach, much longer term than mining. And okay, it's right
Right.
next door to big active mine, but there is a tarmac road access now. And, you know, one could potentially take buses at tourists going off to the Kruger Park, and they can nip in, you know, for like a sort of halfway stop. So I think there's so much potential.
Yeah, and there's been a huge amount of infrastructure development in the Eastern Bushveld in the last 10 years. So I think things have changed a lot there.
They have, yeah. There is, it's much more accessible now.
Yeah, I know the model that the big nickel mine in Sudbury does. They took their disused former mine and turned it into a part of the science center, and that's worked very well as a underground thing, and also the Cullinan here.
Yeah, no, I think there's lots of models that we can develop. And I mean, it's interesting, for example, that Hans Marinsky, when he discovered the reef, you may maybe remember the story. He interacted with three farmers on the local, on which had the farmland, one Andreas Lombard and the Schumann brothers, and they actually made the discoveries. Marinsky directed it, but and Lombard's son and his nephew, I believe, both became famous geologists, professors at Pretoria University.
Right.
And now, obviously, things have moved on, and now, huge numbers of Black people from the local community are now studying and are practicing geologists, and they come from the region and obviously have a huge advantage on us. They speak the language and communicate with the people, much nicer. So there's, and I mean, many of these things probably should be driven by geologists from the community. That would be the perfect way of doing it. And people like myself just sit in the background and guide them along a little bit, but I think it's all possible, but we just have to be optimistic that we can get the government on side. I think the community and the mining companies would join in. The government is often quite difficult to get them to move in the direction that we would like.
Yeah, and quite an active geology department at University of Limpopo now too, which is sort of sitting in the Bushveld complex in the northern lobe there.
Yeah, not too far away. Yeah.
So I think we're about at the time where we should refer back to Nonthabeko to see what's new in the world at the end of our Bushveld session before we move along.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Roger, for such an insightful conversation. For me personally, I've always been interested in how Indigenous communities and traditional communities play a part in geotravel, in geoheritage. And it's so nice in how you talk about what you're talking about now, and it talks about including more people on the ground, because so much certain words can be so verbose, and things and fields can be so technical that it doesn't include our Indigenous communities and the people that really live next to and near these specific geosites. So thanks for that enlightenment as well, and ironing out how people can definitely play a much bigger role to that. Just checking on some of the things that are going on the side. A lot of congratulatory messages coming through, Roger, for you. A lot of people saying, Rory Sang saying, I'm in support of the Platinum Reef City. Quite interesting, pointing to the conversation that the both of you just had now. Rory Sang also saying, congratulations. Joining in, Johan Kruger also saying, congratulations. What a worthy recipient Roger is. And John Wilson also jumping in on that. And Unati Madondo jumping in and saying, what a fascinating and insightful topic and conversation this is. So thank you so much for this conversation. I'm sure you're about to head on and dive in some more with geotraveling as you navigate towards more East Africa and some of the things that you've been up to and been writing about. So it's back to you guys.
Thank you very much, Nonthabeko. So the next topic is kind of leading us into taking your experience and expertise and translating that into sharing it in writings. So back in 2009, you approached me in my capacity as editor of the Geological Society's magazine, the GeoBulletin, with a proposal to institute a regular contribution to the GeoBulletin where you would highlight geological sites. And the first edition of what became the Geotraveller was published in March the following year. And I have a copy of the very first Geotraveller here. So from March 2010. And it was so interesting that it also was on the cover. And that's a picture you've shown us already. And then, yeah, as Andrew mentioned, I think at the time of his motivation for this, you'd published 46. Now you're up to 47, and the 48th must be in the mail virtually for the December issue. And you've also been publishing in GeoHeritage as well. So how has that process gone for you?
Well, hello, Steve. Yeah, it has, and it was fantastic that the two of us started it together. And you gave me, when I came up with the idea, you gave me the opportunity of publishing in the in the GeoBulletin magazine. And I came up with this idea, the Geotraveller, the snappy title. You came up with the logo of the luggage wrap, which was very nice. So as I'm talking, we just have a few typical pictures of sites around the world. The one on the left is the Colorado River in America, the one on the right, Yellowstone, the oldest national park in the world. Here we see pictures of Monument Valley, which is, on at the beginning of Universal Studios movies. And on the right, Lake Louise in the Canadian Rockies, your part of the world, showing these incredible emerald lakes where it's related to gravels and which enter the lake. This is Cappadocia, the so-called fairy chimneys in Cappadocia. It's interlayered lavas, volcanic lavas and ashes and differential weathering. And as you can see, the one on the left is, a whole town is built in these features. And of course, I've been lucky that as I've started this work, Google Earth is up and running, so you can annotate Google Earth images. This is Ephesus, the antiquity site in Turkey. And it just shows how all of these incredible localities just tie in with the geology so easily. And the idea was very much a visual geology, supported by photography, Google Earth images, maps as well, sometimes, but not always. And I felt that the Geotraveller concept is a sort of almost like a sort of sub-branch, if you like, of the GeoHeritage, where just a very, very visual approach to geology. And if you go into these famous places, such as the Colorado River Canyon, in that particular picture is the Canyonlands National Park, not the Grand Canyon. And then you can label the different rock units, and you can stand there with laymen, looking at the view, and you can explain in 2 seconds basically why you've got these vertical cliffs and benches, and which are the hard layers, which are the soft layers. It's in there, it happens to be the sandstones make the vertical layers. And one of the hard layers is called the White Rim Sandstone. And if you go to Canyonlands, you can drive along the White Rim Trail. So many of these things are geological. And at Yellowstone, which, as you would know, I'm sure, is the world's oldest national park, it was gazetted back in 1880s, I think, by memory. And when you visit, most of the being America, of course, they have these fantastic organization, and they call them pullouts, in English, laybys, next to the road, where you don't even have to get out your car, if it's cold and snowy, and you can lean out the window and see these fantastic information boards explaining everything. And the first one you read as you go in, and all the booklets, they all say, well, okay, Yellowstone's got wolves and bears, which people love to see, and elk and moose and things. But it's a geological park. It was established, obviously, because we would know, because of the Yellowstone, the yellow rocks. That's why that one picture showing the yellow rocks, the rhyolitic lavas and volcanic ashes, and the Giza fields. It's the biggest concentration of geothermal features on Earth. So the geysers are driven by a magma chamber down at depth. And as you drive around the park and visit the different spots, all of this is explained. And you can go on geological tours, and the people who take the tours aren't geologists, but they're rangers who've read up and got, have got additional information. So I thought this is the most, sort of amazing thing as you travel around as a more experienced geologist, and maybe let's share it with the people back in South Africa. That's how it started, in the geological community. And now, as you said very kindly, I've managed to extract a representative group of articles, expand them and join them up a little bit, and put them in a book, which with Springer, which is selling overseas. I think it's sold a few thousand copies already, which for a technical book, I think is quite nice. And I think it would probably make a superb documentary series, but I just don't have contacts necessarily in, you know, this type of field, but maybe people at Rhodes might be able to run with that idea. And I think if we can bring geology to the layperson in a much more exciting way than it was maybe done years ago, that's really the concept. I think everything has to be visual. You know, I stood in the Kruger Park with Prof Morris Vierne, and you know, you can point out, climb to the top of little copies there, and you know, we've been lucky that we've had armed rangers to escort us on little trips around in the bush, and you can look at the different sites and things. But you know, it's possible to talk about high-powered geology, but it's also possible to push that to one side and just point out what you can actually see. And I think that was my idea. It has to be visual, not too in depth, and you know, things that the average tourist would be interested in. So, I mean, the cover of the Geotraveller book is the famous, one of the most famous arches at the Arches National Park. Oh, there you go, Steve. I think you might be organised. Thank you for that. Now, when the white people first saw that traveling, you know, Western America, they thought these things were built by ancient Indian, you know, the American Indian culture, the indigenous people of North America, but they're natural. And it's just remarkable how geology can form these natural structures. And it's all explained in the park in guidebooks and information boards. And so I sort of summarize some of these things. And of course, it only works if people have written scientific articles, or you've been there and gleaned the information, you know, from the park and the book. So I try to reference everybody's work as fairly as possible. And very little of it is my own ideas. It's just really summarizing, you know, what is quite well known and bringing it to a wider audience. And yeah, and I think with climate change and being such a hot topic, I'd like to see people accept that the Earth is always changing, always evolving. We never stay still, and we're in these different climatic cycles that you and I have talked about recently. And you know, I know the climate scientists like to push medieval warming out the way, you know, because it's an inconvenient truth to sort of adapt to a one-own statement. But this is ridiculous. We need to be honest and accept that the world changes. I mean, there was a 0.5 meter sea level change in the North Sea, the English Channel, by the way, in medieval times, and that drove the Anglo-Saxon, you know, invasion, if you like, from North Germany and Holland into Britain, you know, and the Frisian Islands was part of the mainland of Germany, and the people had a choice: do you go into the mainland and interact with the, you know, the German tribes that the Roman Empire couldn't sort out, or did you jump in a few boats and come across to Britain, where, you know, and fill the void left by the Roman Empire? So migration and, you know, being forced by climate change is all part of the story. And we can see in East Africa, it's also part of the whole human and hominid evolution as well. We can talk about that maybe in the next one.
Yeah, I think you may be slightly underplaying your abilities here, in terms of, like, lots of geologists can visit interesting rocks and can write scientific papers on them, but the ability to kind of turn that into quite a educational and interesting at a variety of different levels kind of output, because so as you say, it's the visual power of the geology, but it's combining that with accessible science that's interesting at a bunch of different levels. That's a skill that most people, I mean, that's why science writing is a very specialized thing that doesn't usually work. And obviously you have developed that well. I was going to ask though, when you, in your travels then, like once you have written about a certain place, do you feel then, like, do you ever get to go back to the same place twice? Or do you feel like, well, I've already written about that, I need to go now to some new site?
Well, I'll answer a few of those points. Strange enough, when I wrote my PhD up, Hugh Eales used to tear his hair about the standard of my English. And it has, you know, my written English, and it has improved over the years. And Andrew Mitchell, who writes superbly, has helped me tremendously on this. And he came up with a very interesting observation when we sort of chat with each other. We're very honest with each other, obviously, because that's how science develops. And we argue about our different models on the Bushveld tremendously. But, you know, he said when I write my Geotraveller series, I write so much more fluently than when I write about the bushveld. So maybe when you don't know too much about areas, you know, or I know too much about the bushveld, you know, the writing goes a little bit easier. But the fundamental principle behind some of these things is that many geologists have visited, you know, these same areas, and you know, it's quite possible that, you know, in the group that we're talking to, a lot of people have been to Yellowstone, but the discipline actually is in reading up about it both before and afterwards, and getting geological maps, which is something that Maurice Villon used to impress on me all the time. You know, where's a map? Can you draw a cross section? Because unless you can draw a cross section, you probably don't understand what you're talking about. Right. So I fiddle around with maps and draw little sections and try to understand it, and maybe then it comes across in the writing. That would be the idea. Yeah, and as you said, supported by photographs, and I'm sure everybody can do it. It just takes time, actually. That's what it really comes down to. So yeah, you enjoy the visit. Yeah, enjoy the visit, but then it's quite a little bit discipline to get your photographs in order, and you know, get them labeled. It's nice to label them, isn't it, and put the rock names and that. So yeah, and then most of the places I've been to probably 2 or 3 times, strangely enough. I went to Yellowstone first with my father back in about 2000. We went on a big trip driving around the US for a month, and then Amelia, my wife, you know, I had to take her to the same places basically, because she now became part of my life. We met in 2002. And so yeah, and many of the places in Europe we've been to, and East Africa, most of the parks in East Africa I've been to 3 or 4 times, or even more. So no, and it's nice to go back again and again and take different photographs from different angles, you know. So
right, yeah, I'm sure you always see new things when you go back each time.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, I think you've done a good job of being neither pure like a travel log, like the kind of thing you'd read on an airplane magazine, nor a technical report, which is also not very accessible. You've done a nice job of blending the crucial information. But I think, yeah, we should check with Nonthabeka and see where we are with the world again before we move on to East Africa.
I see a couple of people holding you to that. Clyde coming through and saying, in order to explain technical subject matter to lay people in an easily understandable way, you need a deeper understanding than the norm. And I'm personally going to add to this, Roger, and say that I'm going to hold you up to that documentary series. And I've already got the name. I was like, Geotraveling Africa with Roger. I really think we could do something. Send something to Netflix. Between all the storytellers that we have from Rhodes University, I really do think you have something up your sleeve, and I'd really urge you to create a series that definitely can break down the world of geology to the rest of us. It would be quite interesting. I mean, I've traveled East Africa solo, but I think after this conversation, it makes me want to travel again, because it feels like I've missed out, Roger. I've missed out quite a lot. So I think you're challenging a lot of us, even though the borders are somewhat closed internationally, you really are challenging us to have a different look to what we have here in the continent. So thank you so much for that input. And I'll just hand it over to you guys for the last segment of it all, and see how much Roger can entice us in how much we can see the world from a different perspective and a different lens.
Thanks, Nonthabeka. I also meant to say, I don't think I actually came up with this nice logo, the travel logo. I think this was my graphics editor, Belinda Boyes-Varley, that actually came up with the design. So she should get the credit for that.
Yeah, especially as she stays in Grahamstown. It's very important.
Exactly. And she's still doing the Geo Bulletin to this day.
She is,
I believe.
Yep.
So yeah, so the last topic is your East African emphasis. So how did you get started in visiting and studying East Africa? How did you go from the Bushveld to there?
Well, strange enough, if I hadn't become a geologist, I probably would have wanted to become a game ranger. So that might have been where it all started. But you know, just a few photographs of East Africa. You know, clearly the Rift Valley, which, you know, the cliffs on the left is a section of the Rift Valley in northern Tanzania. On the right is a three-dimensional image of Lake Albert and the Rwenzori Mountains in Uganda and the Congo, looking south. Clearly, these images really help our understanding. On the left is my wife, Amelia, with the hat on the left, with two of our guides looking up at the rocks at the Hell's Gate National Park, which is an analog for Yellowstone. And on the right, that's again Amelia coming back off the summit of Mount Meru, which is higher than any mountain in Europe, by the way. They're huge climbs. Mount Kenya on the left, the iconic peaks of Mount Kenya, and on the right, the famous paleoanthropological site of Olduvai Gorge in northern Tanzania, which is one of my favorite localities. The black rocks at the bottom's lavas, and then the fossils are in the sort of the clays and the volcanic ashes. And this is that picture you showed on the geobulletin, the ash cone at Mount Meru, which is an active volcano in the Arusha National Park, just sitting next to the town of Arusha in northern Tanzania. So yeah, you know, my father used to come back. He was an engineer in Bristol, and we used to, as Andrew said in the introduction, we lived in a small village with a little local library. And I loved books from an early age, I have to say. You know, if I wasn't playing football, I was reading books, I think would be my father's summary of my life. And, you know, he used to come back with these fantastic books from the big library, Central Library in Bristol. I think libraries are the most brilliant thing. Many are on East Africa. And, you know, famous people like Ian Douglas Hamilton, who wrote on the elephants in Amboseli, and, you know, all those characters from those days. And, you know, I remember reading about the discoveries of Lewis and Mary Leakey at Olduvai Gorge, you know, as a youngster in National Geographic. And then when I was in Zambia, I had the chance to go up to East Africa and with some friends, and we went up on the Tanzam Railway, and we actually stayed at the YMCA in Moshi, and climbed Kilimanjaro. And, you know, I think the whole trip cost us about $50. It's a very different story now, of course. And in fact, our guide gave up at the crater rim, and the two of us went on and climbed through the glaciers. And, you know, there was a lot of snow in glaciers in those days, a lot of ice sheets, almost was melted. And we actually climbed up to the summit for an extra 3 hours on our own and just found our way. You know, good old adventurous days when you're younger. And since then, I've been back many times. And again, Maurice Villon, my colleague that I've mentioned many times, the two of us came up with an idea that we should do a field trip of the Mineralogical Society of South Africa, MINSA, part of the GSSA, and we put together a field trip in 1995. Our timing was appalling because we missed the World Cup final, and we had to listen on a transistor radio in the Serengeti Park to the Springboks, or you know, the winning drop kick by our fly half. I've forgotten his name now, but I should know. And it was the most brilliant thing was that we had 20 South Africans on the trip, maybe 19 South Africans, maybe one visitor from Europe, and so we were all pretty excited. And we had 4 vehicles, with 5 in each vehicle, and with the driver guides. And they sang Nkosi Sikelel' Africa to celebrate the victory, even though they didn't know anything about rugby. And I only realized at the time that, of course, that's the national anthem of Tanzania as well. And these are special moments. And you realize that when you go to East Africa, it's very, very different to going to the parks in Southern Africa, where we tend to drive ourselves and we isolate ourselves from the communities. And one of the most fantastic things is going with these guides. They're not drivers, they're actually guides. And my cat's decided to walk on the table. He's going to come in the camera now. And, you know, and I've realized by chatting to the guides on many, many trips, how their minds are completely open to learning new things. I'm sort of convinced that, you know, maybe it's partly Africa that the guys are just fun, you know, they just love learning stuff. But I think maybe we're all too highly educated in our own field, so we find it difficult to learn new things. And they're obviously brilliant at animals and birds and trees and all the indigenous communities, and, you know, speaking different languages. Quite amazing, really. And yet many of them have only got a matric and maybe one, like a tourism diploma. But they pick up the geology really quickly, and they're absolutely desperate to learn the geology because they've got more information to pass on, and they love passing information to the tourists and making it an enjoyable trip. It's a strange thing to explain. You wouldn't get it in my country, the UK. I think that type of you know, my ex-country, I would like to say, you know, that type of enthusiasm to pass on to tourists. You know, people there would see it just as a job, but these guys in East Africa, they just love it, and they love the bush and the parks, and they're very, very proud of them. And so then I thought, well, why don't I start writing some of it up? And, you know, as you said, my first one was on Mount Meru. The second one was on Odonyolengai, which for people who haven't heard of it is the only, well, the most active volcano in northern Tanzania, next to Lake Natron, which is famous for the flamingo, and it means mountain of God in the Maasai language. They've been living around the slopes for 400 or 500 years, and it erupts on average every 15 to 20 years, and it's pretty active at the moment. And it's very, very famous because it's the only volcano in the world which where one can actually observe the eruption of two types of magma, which are immiscible, like, almost like water and oil, as you would know, Steve. You know, two immiscible magmas coming up the same conduits. You know, one is the normal silicate magma, which is a nephelinite, and the other one is very, very strange sodium carbonatite magmas, you know, nitrocarbonatites, which you know, Professor Dawson at Edinburgh University described in great detail back in the 60s, 70s. I quote all of his work extensively. And this is the great thing about East Africa, is that there has been an awful lot of work by you know, eminent scientists. There's pretty reasonable geological maps, but it's just not accessible to the average person. So in a way, that was my challenge, I think, was to get all of this information and make it accessible and try to write it up in simple ways. And then from that, the book developed. And then I'm now, as you pointed out, involved in a third book, which is actually finished from the writing point of view, and it's with Strake, the local Cape Town publishers, and they're doing the layout at the moment, and then we will do the final editing, I guess, in the next few weeks. And you know, it's, as you mentioned, it's going to be a more popular style guidebook. It's essentially going to describe landforms and geology of the national parks in the countries you mentioned, and you know, the Virunga Mountains, for people who aren't so aware, they're in Uganda, Rwanda, and the Congo. They cut across the three countries, and people mostly visit to see the mountain gorilla. But the Congo's got two of the two most active volcanoes in East Africa. One of which is Nyiragongo, which I climbed just only last year for the first time, and it's one of only half a dozen places in the world where you can get to the crater rim and look down and see this active lava lake. And the group I went with were the other dozen people were non-geologists, and I mean, these people, I mean, they were just blown away, and they all started to,
figuratively, I hope, yes.
Well, yeah, it's relatively safe, although it did erupt after we were there, and people had to get off the mountain quite quickly. But they've got it monitored from Goma, from the observatory. And the people, yeah, when you're faced with these things, it's very, very different to seeing it on the TV or on the movies. And people, and all of a sudden the people are saying, well, we don't understand it. What's the difference between magma and lava? You know, why does it make so much noise? You know, what's all those cracks in the lava lake? And we were lucky that a little parasitic cone had opened up next to it, and I could say, well, you know, we're witnessing what's known as a strombolian eruption, a strombolian style eruption with the glowing rock fragments or scoria, you know, thrown up in about, you know, 50, 100 meters and coming down. And because at night it's just an amazing sight. So it's just the most remarkable part of the world. And as Nondambali said, you can go there to see the animals and even the people, whatever you want, but the landforms and the geology is in your face. Everywhere you go, there's an interesting landform and a piece of geology. And that's very different to most places in the world.
Yeah, very good. I think we need to move on to finally the concept of your foundation that you mentioned earlier as our last little topic. So what's that about, and what's the plan?
Well, it's a bit, I think it got slightly pushed forward, shall we say. It's just in the conceptual stage at the moment, and I've been interacting with various, you know, safari companies and guides up in Arusha, and also in Kenya a little bit as well, and also and a little bit in Rwanda and Uganda, and we're trying to put together some you know, some concepts of going up to teach geology. And I would like to see Rhodes coming in on this and sponsoring it a little bit, and maybe, you know, being able to offer the guides some form and the diploma might not be the right word, but some form of award where they can say they've attended a geological course on the geological heritage of their area, and then they could maybe, become, specialized geological guides for trips, because geological tourism, without any doubt, is growing and growing. And it's many people go to some of these places to see geology. They don't just go to see the animals and the wildlife. I know Namibia, for example, geological tourism is quite well developed. So that's the idea, and I thought we could establish a foundation, which I would also partly fund, and use it to teach the guides and the rangers. I missed that out, the national park rangers as well, and maybe sit down with them and administrators of the parks and see if we can lay out geological trails. So for example, one can go to the famous Ngorongoro conservation area. It's not a national park, it's a conservation area, but it's a world famous locality, of course. The caldera is 20 kilometers in diameter, so you feel like you're in a huge sanctuary when you drive down into it. But there's, one could do geological, small geological walks there and have little, interactive geological situations and explain how the caldera were formed. And similarly at Olduvai Gorge, where the anthropological site is, and there's a brilliant museum, and they've got fantastic guides to show you on the whole hominid story and all the work that the Leakeys did. But the geology, as usual, tends to get a little bit left out, and the people don't fully understand it. That's what they've explained to me, and hopefully this new guidebook that Straker putting out, or hopefully it will come out, in the next year, will actually help these people, and all the guides and the rangers will have access to the book, I hope, and they can use it to further their knowledge. And then, if we can do some teaching, and maybe Rhodes can help with setting up, even Zoom, online type teaching, this would be fantastic.
Sure. We actually have a junior staff member who's just coming into the department, who's actually doing his research in the Tanzanian Rift Valley there, in that area. It's our new sedimentologist and paleontologist, it's Linda Mavusa. So there are opportunities present already to have expertise that we can transfer.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. And of course, it's quite possible that geologists in these countries can start to take over the, I sort of feel like I've initiated something, because, I was approached to write the book because it's difficult to find people from the local area to present, have this sort of all-round knowledge, and it takes a lot of time, of course, to put together the data, and you have to have traveled most of the parks, and people obviously don't have that opportunity necessarily, but it would actually provide employment opportunities. So geologists in East Africa, instead of looking for jobs in the government or the mining industry, can actually get involved in geological tourism in the future. That would be my thought, and it may well be that we can encourage geological tourism to the parks. And I've heard, through various channels, that the national parks in Tanzania particularly are quite excited about it, because it would take pressure off the main tourism, where people want to go for the peak periods when the wildebeest migration is on in the Serengeti. And they don't go in the rainy seasons. But those rainy seasons, it doesn't rain every day, as you would know. And geological, from a geological point of view, it can even be better, because you get clearer skies between the showers to the photographs. And so it can actually spread the tourism out over into the off seasons, where the prices are lower as well.
Okay.
But yes, phenomenal opportunities. And as a final comment, as I was saying earlier, the whole hominid story is related. The evolution of hominids is generally accepted. It was mostly concentrated in the Rift Valley. Of course, there's all the discoveries outside Johannesburg as well. And obviously most of it was driven by climate change. And I think we need to accept this, and accept that climate change is why we're here as humans, and we need to embrace climate change and not panic about it, and just adapt ourselves and manage the whole situation. So by going to these places, it opens up your mind to all of these things, and you can envisage how the hominids evolved. And Olduvai Gorge is only, 10, 15 kilometers from Ngorongoro. And so when these, to make a caldera, as you well know, we're talking about some of the most catastrophic eruptive activity that the Earth's ever seen. You know, to make a caldera 20 kilometers in diameter, and Ngorongoro, the mountain, may originally have been as high as Everest, and the whole top has obviously collapsed into the magma chamber, and huge catastrophic events which would have obliterated any hominids in the vicinity at that time.
Right.
And every time you have these big cataclysmic volcanic eruptions, and even the rifting in the valley, you obviously, you know, create new ecological, you know, parameters where the different hominids can evolve. So some of my writing, I've tried to explain how, you know, the black panthers, as they're known, which, you know, they're just melanistic variants of leopards, but you only get them in the Aberdare and Mount Kenya national parks, and maybe Mount Elgon slightly. But if it wasn't for the Afro-montane forests on the volcanic uplands, these species wouldn't have evolved. So the Rift Valley and the volcanic activity has created incredible niches for the new species to evolve, which is why East Africa is famous for having this incredibly rapid speciation. So yeah, and even the wildebeest migration on the Serengeti is to some extent driven by geology, because they carve in the eastern area on the volcanic ashes, which are derived from Old Lengai, and that volcano has only been active for the last 20, 30,000 years. So it's a relatively new phenomenon. So sometimes on BBC style documentaries, you might see people saying, well, you know, this has been going on for millennia. Well, it probably hasn't. You know, East Africa is an active geological story, and the rifting and the volcanic activity are driving all of this speciation and animal behavior. And it's just a remarkable place to study these things, because maybe in other parts of the world, it just doesn't exist anymore. Humans have put their big sort of footprint and obliterated all of the story. But in East Africa, you can probably see a huge amount of like interrelationship between geology and speciation. You know, not just animals, obviously plants. So they are. Yeah, and I've written. Sorry, Steve. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, I've also written a little bit on the evolution of the mountain gorilla, and I think the mountain gorilla is a species or subspecies which people are very fascinated by because they're so human-like. You know, and you only get them in two localities. You get them in the Burundi, impenetrable forest, extremely well named because it's so thick, and that's in Uganda, and that's on a piece of basement terrains which have been uplifted next to the Albertine Rift, and then you get them in the Virunga Mountains. And I've speculated that the Burundi population, which represents about half of the population, is the oldest, because they split off from the main gorilla branch about 400,000 years ago, but the Virunga volcanism is probably younger than 100,000. So the Afro-montane forest wouldn't have existed on the Virunga Mountains when the gorilla first evolved, the mountain gorilla. So they probably evolved in the forest of Burundi, and then they, maybe population pressure calls them to migrate from Burundi. It's not too far, 40, 50 kilometers to the Virungas. But I didn't realize till I went there, and it's the type of thing that you don't pick up on these documentary programs where they focus on sort of pretty pictures rather than the science, that the mountain gorilla are only in Uganda, Rwanda, and the mountains in the Congo, which are either extinct or dormant, and there are no mountain gorillas on the two most active volcanoes in Nyiragongo and Nyiramugira. I always mispronounce that one, but the two active volcanoes in the Congo don't actually have. They have the forest, but they don't have the mountain gorilla. So and that maybe is a sign that they moved to these other forests in more recent times. And as I said, the Afro-montane forests, they could only develop on those uplands or volcanic areas. Is all related to the rifting, whether it's uplands, lifted up by the rifting. The Ruwenzori Mountains being the obvious example of a huge uplift, and then the volcanoes as well, where the forests have developed. And in between the forest is savannas, where the gorillas just can't survive, of course.
Sure. No, I think that's a good note to finish on, that if it wasn't for geology, probably none of us would be here. And if we don't learn to understand and live with geology, we might not be here indefinitely. I think it's time for us to revert back to non-tobacco. And from personally, thank you very much, Roger. I've enjoyed this, and congratulations again.
Thank you very much.
Wow, 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 wow. Thank you so much for a great session. Very, very insightful. And I think some of the comments here are really a testament to that. You certainly have read our appetites and introduced us to a different lens of traveling. And Roger, before you go, someone like John in the audience who is here with a question says, are there any geo-traveling guides in sandparks? Or perhaps maybe, I guess we're all interested in, after this conversation, what do we do with our interest, Roger? Who do we find in South Africa that can introduce us some more into the geo-traveling world? I think that's where people want to know, what do we do after this now? Are there geo-travelers in South Africa that people can have access to? But more specifically, this one is asking regarding sandparks.
Yeah, well, the first thing they could do is go and buy my Geotraveller book. I mean, I desperately need the royalties. That would be really nice. Of course, I don't. But, you know, and they can get all of the articles on ResearchGate if you want to know the truth, which is all free. And I should have said this earlier, actually. When I loaded all my stuff on ResearchGate, I was quite new to all of this sort of scientific, you know, story on the internet, and huge numbers of the students and postgrads at Rhodes all follow me, and although I don't really interact with them, I really appreciate that, actually, and to see all the different names, and I try to spot which names are from the Eastern Cape and which names are from, you know, the Lesotho people or the Swana people or whatever, and it's just brilliant. I mean, and that's where the internet's actually fantastic. From a South African point of view, I haven't written too much on South Africa, partly because there's a lot of geologists are active here in different areas, and I don't like to step on others' toes too much. But there are some wonderful books, also published by Strake. You know, the book by Professor Terence McCarthy and Bruce Rubich on the old geology of Southern Africa is really a superb reference. And there's my cat, you see. She can't stay down. And there are several books on geological journeys in South Africa by writers such as Gavin Whitfield and Nick Norman, so, you know, which includes some of the parks. And I have actually presented to the Geological Society of South Africa that we should maybe think of doing a Southern African geological guidebook to the Southern African national parks. But I didn't get too much joy with that. And I think the best way would be to make it collaborative and invite as many people as possible to write on the different parks, not just leave it for one person. It's too big a topic really for one person, because there's a lot of information in our country. So yeah, there are opportunities, but the East African parks are better because the rifting and the volcanic activity is so much more recent and it's ongoing. So whereas our geology here is brilliant, we have the oldest rocks in the world, really, in the Barberton Mountain land, but it requires a slightly more technical explanation. You can't always see, you know, what the geologists can see, so to speak, you know. So the concept doesn't work everywhere, but there are lots and lots of opportunities here. There's no doubt.
And you definitely have left a lot of people here still inquiring more. A lot of people saying that, I didn't know geology was this fascinating, and they're sharing about some of the spaces that they visited and being inspired to visit. Someone here also saying, Noreen saying, thank you for a really interesting talk. I'd love to become a geo-traveller. These trails could also be used to educate teachers, make schooling more interesting and relevant for children. So very much congratulations from Noreen there. A lot of other congratulatory messages also coming through, simply saying congratulations, and thank you for a thrilling conversation. Another one, Rory Sang, still holding on, saying, for those interested in geotourism, how do we approach this? She still wants to take the conversation with you off air. I'm sure we'll make a plan and we'll communicate about that in our platforms and our networks. But for us, we're completely out of time. It's like 7:19 South African time on this side, and we definitely have to end the session. For those of you who we couldn't get to some of their comments, we'll definitely reach out to you and share more about how you can interact with Roger or find out more about what Roger has said. But he did also include saying, buy his Geotraveller book. You definitely won't miss out. He's been at it since 2010 with it. It's all the way till 2021. So he definitely has all the knowledge that will entice you further into the conversation. So Roger, thank you so much for your time. I don't know if you have any last parting words to leave before we also say goodbye to everyone else within this place.
No, just thank you very much to you and your team at Rhodes for setting this up, and particularly the Vice Chancellor, of course. You know, it's been an absolute privilege to get this award. I couldn't really believe it when it happened, and I still don't think it's me type of thing. You know, it's a lot of what I do is just out of pure enjoyment and pleasure. So yeah, and thank you for everybody who's joined in and made these very lovely comments to me. And if it's inspired people to either understand more about geology and, you know, maybe look at climate change in a more positive light and appreciate that, you know, not all is not lost, you know, that we can be very optimistic about our future. And in my Geotraveller book, for example, I even talk about how the ancient, you know, Greek civilizations and the Romans dealt with climate change, you know, at the famous locality Troy, for example. There's all sorts of fascinating research has been done and how these people managed it. And they dealt with the problems and kept their civilizations going. And I'm sure we can do the same, particularly in South Africa, because we're a hardy bunch over here. I think people forget that, you know. It's not just the Springboks that are a tough bunch of people. You know, the whole country is full of very you know, motivated people, I believe. And I think, you know, we can actually, you know, make our own future much better if we just all pull together a little bit. That would be the most fantastic thing. You know.
Thank you. Collaboration. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
And congratulations very much. In South Africa, we still say halala, ndizandagandini, and definitely so within your field and your work. And thank you so much for really opening up the door for us, for many of us, into a different perspective, into seeing the world. So thank you that very, very much. That definitely ends our conversation and our virtual series for 2021. How's about that, hey? Ending on such a beautiful high note. So a big thank you to Dr. Scoon and Professor Prevec for navigating the conversation with us. The topic was Geology of South Africa and the national parks in East Africa, its impact on tourism. Thank you so much to Dr. Andrew Mitchell for sharing the citation with us, and of course, everyone else from the Rhodes University space who has been part of the conversation. For all of you guys who've missed any of these conversations, please be sure to go to the Rhodes University YouTube channel, where you'll be able to get an update of the conversation, as well as all the other 3 that we've had throughout the series. Our next session is unfortunately for everyone at home, it's going to be in 2022. So it gives you all the time to start nominating the distinguished guests for 2022. Applications should be opening by next year, around about May, June, July. So definitely send some through if you've identified a couple of people, such as Dr. Roger, who can be part of these empowering and really inciting conversations. So thank you so much for everyone. Thank you to the Rhodes University's Division for Communication and Advancements, fostering productive lifelong relationships with our alumni. Thank you so much to Dr. Mabizela. And of course, thank you so much to the team that so many of you don't get to often see. Thank you to Tami, Mandilake, thank you to Shemaine, and of course, thank you to Ikona, as well as Luyanda and Mr. Jacobs. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Rhodes University, for this opportunity. And that's how we wrap up our distinguished alumni conversations for 2021. I will see you all in 2022. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nontobeko. Thank you, Dr. Scoon. Thank you, everyone.